Hi, and welcome back to Leaving Babylon. This is Madeline. I'm glad you're here. I'm starting a new series of videos. It was supposed to be just one video, but it's kind of ballooned because there's so much to cover. So this one is going to be part one, and this will be the Jordan, or Jordan River, as it's known in the Bible. I have been working hard on this video to bring together a lot of very complex ideas and try to demonstrate them in a coherent way that will draw you in, but also give you a kind of understanding that leads to something. So not just, I'm not the kind of person that wants to just point out incongruities in the narrative, for example. I want to be able to demonstrate connectivity between ideas and between the Bible, actually, as well as the historical narrative and the things that other people are finding as well, right? So there's been people that have been exposing truth for a long time. We're not the only generation that has been doing that. My father is an example. He, back in the 70s and 80s, he knew all about the Freemasons. I think he was one of the only people that was actively researching that. So I guess it's partly in my system that I too am sort of in this community of people with the alternative views on the official narratives. So I have to say that there's like a family history here with me. And I do appreciate what my dad did, even though when I was younger, I didn't really get it. I didn't understand why he was so obsessed with that stuff. Now I'm older. Obviously, I have children, and I understand that the world is much more complex, and the things that I fell into as a young person, the temptations, the sin, and all of that, were because I wasn't really interested in finding out anything. I didn't know the dangers, and I think that's why understanding these things is really key. We're also on a journey as a church, a body of believers. We're on a journey. We're on a spiritual journey, individually and together. So this message is really to help us, again, pull off some of the layers that have been placed over our eyes over the years. And this video, and I think there's going to be more videos, I know there is, because I have a ton of content. I just couldn't fit into this without rushing through it. I want to make sure I give the due attention to these topics as I can. So I want to weave like a biblical cosmology, which some people may call flat earth. I want to weave the biblical cosmology as well as spiritual and scriptural references and apply it to our generation. Where are we now? And what do we need to know about the situation that the world is in? And so this series called The River came to me as I finished my last video. I was intending to do other topics, and I may still in the future. My husband is adamant that I keep doing this, and I've had so many lovely emails from people saying that they're enjoying the content, and they really hope that I can bring more of it, and I definitely can. I've been doing years of research, and I do believe that God has given me an interest in this for a reason to share it and not to keep it to myself. But as far as when that will happen, I don't know. But I do want to talk about this particular series, which is called The River. And this one I'm calling Jordan because I think, even though I'm not going to specifically focus on a river or the Jordan, it will be woven into what I'm going to talk about. The one thing I really want to blow a hole in is the understanding of where the places in the Bible are actually located. I'm not saying I know exactly where all of them are. That's not the point of this video. But I want to demonstrate that where we're told in the back of our Bibles that are published by all of these different publishers, the places in the Bible are not on that little map. Basically, I have followed other channels in the past, and there's one channel I cannot find anymore. I think I stopped following for some reason, but he's a Christian. He believes that there was a cataclysm at some point, and he also believes that, as many of us do, that a lot of the rebuilding of what we believe to be true now according to history, or that many believe to be true according to history, was fabricated. And he also works with stone. He is not a wealthy man. He doesn't belong to the Freemasons. He believes in the Bible. He believes in the coming revelations, the end of the Revelation period. And I'll have to find him, and if I do, I will share it with you. But he goes all over the world exposing the fabricated so-called ancient sites all over the world. And he can do this because he understands stonemasonry, and he understands what to look for when you're looking for fabrications. And it is my belief that the narrative that we've been given is false to lead us away from where things actually happened and the biblical locations as they relate to our earth, the earth that God created around us. So I want to share with you a video, sort of a video clip. It's about 6.5 minutes long. And it covers this movie that came out in 2004 by a producer called Night M. Shyamalan or something like that. He did the movie Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis, and he's done a few other ones. I think one called The Happening, and a few others. And they're all very kind of mysterious, but they all seem to give a message that, first of all, this movie, so this one's called The Village, and if you haven't seen it, I'll just give a little recap before I show it. It's basically a village set in like the 1800s, which is kind of correlating to this whole concept of the cover-up of history and the reset of all these cities, and just kind of this general dumbing down of the population so that we don't actually know what time we live in, we don't know where we are, we don't know who we are, and we can't leave certain areas of this earth that we live in. And I think that's just the point that I'm taking from this movie. So I want to show you some clips. I've put some little comments on either side of the frame of the video so that you can see my thoughts as it goes through. But just to bear in mind, and I'll give a spoiler away now, just in case you want to watch the video and you don't want to hear this, fast forward. But basically, at the end of the video, you find out that they actually live in modern times. They've been kept in this village with monsters, created monsters in the woods that surround the village. So they can't leave because of the fear of these monsters. But there's also a governing body that sort of stoke the fear and create the fear. And they're the ones who have designed the system to really keep these people hemmed in to where they want them to be. And it's very, very strange, that people would behave this way. But I think that's what we're seeing today. And we're unraveling some of these mysteries in our own environment. And so I'll just play the video.
In what appears to be the 19th century, there's an isolated Pennsylvania village in the middle of the woods. The story begins with them holding a funeral. In the middle of the meal, some strange noises are heard coming from the forest, making Noah Percy, a man with a developmental disability, laugh and clap with excitement. Among their daily habits, we see them burying anything red and sending a man up a watchtower every night. On the water, we also see the reflection of a passing mysterious hooded figure wearing red. One morning, Edward is approaching the school, as he is the teacher there, only to find the kids outside in a circle. They're looking at the body of an animal, bloody and missing its fur. The kids swear they didn't bring it there. Everyone goes inside and Edward asks his class who could have possibly done such a heinous act. The kids answer with those we don't speak of because they are meat-eating monsters. Edward tells them it makes no sense since the village has a truce with them. They don't enter their forest and the monsters, in return, don't enter the village. That afternoon, the village elders have a meeting. They're discussing possible festivities when Lucius Hunt, son of Elder Alice Hunt, requests to see them. Lucius has written down what he wants to say and proceeds to read it to them, after reassuring them his mother has nothing to do with it, so he wants permission to cross the forest and go to other towns so he can acquire some new medicines. He thinks the monsters won't attack him because creatures can sense emotions, and Lucius is pure of intention. The guard for the night is Finton Coin. Lucius joins him there and asks him what he thinks of other towns. Finton replies they're wicked places where wicked people live. At the same time, at the edge of town, a group of boys is playing a game of bravery. You must stand on a stump, facing away from the forest and with your arms stretched, and see how much you can last before getting scared. The current player swears he hears noises in the woods, but he stays on his spot. Back to Lucius, August is telling him that one can run from sorrow, but sorrow will still find you because it can smell you like a dog. Then he looks at a mysterious black box in the corner. Then we cut back to the boys again, who finally are running away from the area when the noises prove to be too much. Morning comes, and Ivy is being called to deal with Noah, who is hitting other boys with a stick. He stops as soon as she asks him to, then she takes him to stare at a special house where he'll be locked in if he doesn't listen. They strike a deal and he promises he won't be hitting anyone again. Now that's over, they decide to spend time together by racing up the hill to the resting rock. Noah asks her not to cheat, but she distracts him and cheats anyway. They make it to the rock and find Lucius already there. He shares a snack with them and Ivy tells him how much her sister cried when he turned her down. She also explains that she was able to tell Lucius is there because a handful of people give the faintest color. Her father has it too. When Noah suddenly leaves to go after a bird, Lucius tells Ivy she runs like a boy. She thanks him for that. Noah makes it back then and pranks Ivy by putting a little toad on her hand. Afterward, he retrieves some red berries from her pocket and puts them in her hand as well. She smiles, enjoying the present, until Lucius points out she's holding the bad color that attracts those we don't speak of. She says they should bury them. Hours later, Lucius is reading one of his letters to the elders again. He tells them about the berries Noah found near a drawing on the resting rock, which means Noah has been entering the forest all this time without anything happening to him. This reinforces his belief that the creatures won't attack him either if he does the same and asks again to be allowed to go to other towns. The elders don't accept. Later at night, back in their house, Alice decides to tell Lucius a story about the other towns. His father had left for the market and was found naked and robbed on a river days later. Alice is telling him this so he can understand the nature of what he wants, but he explains he doesn't want to do this for himself, it's for the sake of the village. He says he isn't the one with secrets, because secrets are everywhere in the village, like the black box Alice has and he points at. Alice says that's for her own good, to be safe from but not forget the evil things from her past. The following day, a group of boys wearing yellow cloaks are walking by the border between village and forest, painting a yellow line on the torch posts that separate both areas. Lucius is among them, and he doesn't go back with everyone when they're done. We cut to the watchtower then. Finton hears a noise and opens the hatch, believing it to be Lucius, but it's one of the monsters. So after some hesitation, he starts ringing the bell to alarm the village. Everyone in town is running back to their houses to hide. While Lucius helps villagers to get to safety, Kitty rushes Noah, the kids and Ivy into the basement. The next day, red markings are found on the doors of all houses. But also a little ritual where two men wearing yellow cloaks leave some meat on a rock for the monsters. Meanwhile, Ivy is awoken in the middle of the night and goes outside. There is Lucius, sitting at her porch. She sits next to him and tells him there will be an inquiry tomorrow to find out how the border was breached. Then she mentions the game of bravery, to which Lucius holds the record. She asks him how he can be so brave, to which he replies he concentrates on what needs to be done. Lucius is visited by Noah, who looks clearly upset by the news. Lucius knows Noah has feelings for Ivy too, but he isn't allowed to say much before Noah stabs him twice. Feeling angry after hearing this, Ivy goes to visit Noah to the house he's been locked at and slaps him repeatedly. His father has to drag her out by force. Alice takes Edward away from the house to talk to him privately, guessing what he has in mind and reminding him he swore an oath he must respect like the rest of the elders do. Next we cut to Ivy getting a bag ready for a trip and telling Lucius she'll leave to fetch some medicines for him. A flashback starts then that shows what had happened in the shed. There are monsters inside, or that's what Ivy thinks at first. They're actually costumes. Edward explains it is all a lie. There used to be rumors about creatures living in the woods on the books he used to teach back in the towns. The screaming in the woods, the taking away the meat offering, the furless animal bodies, the drills, all of it was the elders' farce, a plan to keep people away from the woods. Their lives weren't meant to harm, but Lucia's situation went too far. She mustn't tell anyone in the outside world about their village. Ivy continues her trip through the woods. Not being able to see the ground, she falls into a hole, and only manages to save herself by hanging on a branch. She carefully climbs out and rests against a fallen tree for a second before going back to her walking. She doesn't make it far before she hears a noise. After throwing a branch in that direction, the noises get worse, so she starts running away until she stops in the middle of the red berries field. A growl makes her turn around. One of the monsters is behind her. She tells herself it's not real, but the creature goes after her, so she starts running again. Eventually she bumps into the fallen tree from before, and that gives her an idea. She stands still and opens her arms, just like the game the village boys played on the stump, and when the monster is about to catch her, she steps aside and makes it fall into the hole. Back in the village, the Percys are visiting Noah, but they don't find him in the house. What they do find, it's an empty hole on the floor, which means Noah had found the hidden monster costume there and ran away with it. When we cut back to the hole, we effectively see the mask had come loose and it was Noah that had chased after Ivy. He passes away in the hole. Ivy continues to walk until she finally finds a road. After leaving her cloak and her bag on the ground, she quickly follows the road until she comes across a very tall wall that she climbs to reach the other side, finally leaving the woods. She's landing on the other side of the wall when a Jeep with the Walker Wildlife Preserve logo parks next to her. A park ranger named Kevin comes out of it and, believing Ivy is an intruder, tells her she isn't allowed to be there. Kevin gets back in the Jeep and drives to the guard shack, where his superior receives him with some advice. He reminds him it's an easy job. They just need to keep people away from the animal sanctuary and not disturb the woods. Kevin shouldn't make conversation with any intruder, only patrol. His superior still remembers when planes were paid not to fly over that area some years ago. The press had caused him enough stress. Soon after that, Ivy is back in the woods wearing her yellow cloak and returning home, while Kevin is on the other side of the wall with the ladder Ivy used to climb back and her pocket watch hanging on the rear mirror.
Okay, so now I want to talk about the land of the Bible, and especially the Old Testament. We all have probably a Bible, and in the back of the Bible you will have your little maps that tell you where everything was. And as you're growing up and you are a child and you're reading your Bible, and I don't know about everyone else, but I looked through the back of it because I found that when you have a point of reference for what they're telling you, you start to put one with the other. And so as they travel through these journeys, whether it be from Egypt to Israel to wherever they might have gone, you start to form these visuals in your mind about, how they were traveling, where they were going. But I want to just right now is start to address the possible and very likely inconsistencies between those little maps in the back of our Bibles and the intentional education that Christians have been taught to think about the land of the Bible. And I'm just going to go through a couple of verses, and then we're going to look at some maps, and we're going to look at some other pieces of information to start building a potential different kind of picture, and not in the area that we have been taught to believe that all of this has taken place. So let's start with Abram in Genesis. And the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And just going further down, it talks about where he went. And verse 6 of chapter 12, And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh. Now, one thing we want to realize is that Abram was coming out of the Chaldees. He was coming away from the land of idolatry. He was coming into an area that God was drawing him toward. And we see in verse 8, he removed them from hence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel. And he pitched his tent, having Bethel in the west and Hai on the east. Directions are also very important, and we'll get into that a little bit later in this video. And he built an altar to the Lord there. So going to the word Bethel and looking at, some of these are helpful, but really looking at what I like to look at is the Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, because I think we get more description. And this talks about Bethel as being the word that's used for house of God, a very ancient city of the Canaanites, and then afterwards of the Benjamites, until the time of Joshua. And then as we go down, we talk about it was situated on a mountain where the tabernacle of the covenant was placed, and where afterwards Jeroboam set up to worship the worship of calves, which obviously is the idolatry that was feeding back into the Israelite nation. But we can see here that it was a mountain. It was a mountainous region by the sounds of it, and it was actually initially the house of God. And we know that Jacob, further along, has his vision of the ladder or this stairway that went to heaven and the angels that were ascending and descending on the ladder. And just drawing attention into, so we're going to look at a couple more verses. So Deuteronomy 4:21. And I think this is when Moses is was told that he was not going to go across the Jordan into the land of milk and honey, into the land of inheritance. And swear that I should not go over Jordan, and that I should not go in unto the good land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for the inheritance. And so we're going to look at the word Jordan. And again, I'm going to go down to the Hebrew Chaldee lexicon. And it was an appellative river, so called from descending, flowing down. And so we know that the German river, the Rhine, also flows down and often is compared to a lake or a sea. And so the Jordan is what they tell us is the largest river of Palestine. It's a huge river. And if we go down further here, it actually says Jordan is put for any large river. So throughout ancient writings, they would use the word Jordan for any large river. And we've seen that about Bethel. And then I want to also just draw attention to when Abram actually went to Bethel, he went on his journeys from the south. So if you're going from the south, where are you going? You're going north. And this is where Bethel was. It was north of where he was, which was in the Chaldee, Babylon region of the earth. I want to look at a few more location references in the Bible. And here we see that for Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, so the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali did more grievously afflict her by way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. So we're getting this picture that the tribes actually were situated by the sea, by Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. And that's the same verse there. Now, when I was reading the Bible as a child, before you look at the maps, and even now, before you position that in a particular land, geographical area, you the Jordan is a very prominent separation between the wilderness and the land that was flowing with milk and honey. It's very intentional that God defined this border that the Jordan is between the past of what Israel was coming away from Egypt and the wilderness, and the coming into the inheritance that God had made for them. And this river here is what they tell us that the Jordan is. And, personally, I find it ridiculous. And it was brought to my attention by another channel I was watching. And it's just been sitting in my mind for a while, just thinking, how ridiculous is it that they tell us this is the Jordan River? It says here, the children of Naphtali, and we're going to look at more geographical locations here, so this is why I'm talking about this. So the children of Naphtali, and their coast was from Heleph and onward, and then the outgoings thereof were at Jordan. And below that, it also talks about the territory of Dan, and the coast of their inheritance was Zorah and Ashtaol and Ershmesh, and etc. So the territory of Dan, the territory of Naphtali, these were coastal regions. And here, this is territory of Issachar, and the coast reaches to Tabor, and I want you to remember the name Tabor. We're going to look at some maps about that. And finally, the reference to a place called Arzareth. This comes from Esdras, 2nd Esdras chapter 13. And for throughout that country there was a great way to go, namely of 1.5 years, and the same region is called Arzareth. So that little map that I referred to in the back of our Bibles, this is supposed to depict the land flowing with milk and honey that God had given to his people as they crossed the Jordan. Well, strangely enough, the Jordan actually is here, and they were supposedly wandering around, from Egypt, coming from way over on the west side, and they would have come around here, and, they would have done a lot of battles and so forth throughout here, but that Jordan River, number one, it's not huge, and we see that there's a location here called Dan, and then there's Naphtali, which we heard was a coastal region. Strangely, though, I think this little so-called sea here is supposed to be the coast that the Naphtali tribe is on. And then Dan has a little tiny piece of coast there. Now, if you realize how small Israel actually is, this is nothing. Like, that little piece for Dan is nothing. And then we look at Issachar and Mount Tabor here, and everything is piddly. This is the most piddly little piece of land, I think, that you could possibly imagine the inheritance of God being such a gift to his people. So I'm just going to put a big question mark on, is that logical? Does it actually align with Scripture? Also want to mention that the Mediterranean Sea is not specifically mentioned in the Bible. I don't know when that name was given to that body of water, but often when we read these scriptures, they talk about the Great Sea. And so we want to make sure that we're not just defaulting to those little maps in our Bible when we think about the sea and the coast. They've put Tyre, they've put Joppa, they've put all these places along that Mediterranean coast. But again, let's just for a moment question whether this could be true. And just to give you an indication of size, Israel is 14 times smaller than Italy. It's tiny. And in fact, it's only, Israel is 7.28% the size of Italy. It's very small. And I just want to drive that point home, because when we talk about the kingdom of God and the people of God and the inheritance that God is giving to his people, initially to the tribes of Israel, and as Christ was brought to the earth through those tribes, that inheritance was obviously expanded because of Christ to all the world. And this piece of land here is what they want us to believe is actually the inheritance of God. Think about that. And it's a dust bowl. It is really not that big. Okay. So I want to just go through. So talking about the end times for a minute, I want to draw attention to the narrative that is being pushed through the various schemes and information pathways that the church has been exposed to through the last couple of centuries. And that tiny little land that we want to just highlight, this is telling us that this little land here is going to be the target of all these foreign major attackers. So we've got Magog, Meshach, and Tubal. And all of these regions that are supposed to descend on this tiny little dust bowl in this area where the arrow's pointing, I'm just going to call that as being very, very unbiblical. And I just, with all the respect that I have for, I do want to be truthful, I do want to be honest, and I want to follow the scriptures in this. And personally, maybe someone will change my mind, but I think that's ridiculous. I do have some old books, and I took this picture out of an old book. I think it was an old Russian history book. But this is just some of the artwork that was in it. A fanciful map of the world doomed by God shows Adam and Eve atop continents surrounded by waterways, fish and islands. And I just want to take note of the waterway that goes around this kingdom. Okay? And that there is this kind of concept, if you were to not have modern maps and the modern Bibles with those maps in the back of them, you may have a different perspective. If you were to draw what the kingdom of God looked like and where the water was, you might draw it in a circle around the land. Here's another depiction of what we get told, so that Israel. Oh shoot. Okay, sorry. That Israel crossed the Jordan, wherever that is. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. So this is supposed to be Jericho. And, these little hills here are supposed to be some kind of big triumph. And then they've just named some other locations around here. And, the Dead Sea is here, and this kind of Jordan was a big impasse for them. And again, here's another sort of view of things. And it says here, it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea and half of them toward the hinder sea, in summer and in winter shall be. So when they're drawing these pictures, they've cleverly picked a body of water there and a body of water there, and that this can kind of just run from there to there. And I think, that's part of how that's been established. But again, just looking at this muddy Jordan, it doesn't really align with maybe the big events that happened around the Jordan, including the baptism of Jesus. Now, we kind of get this picture throughout Scripture that the river, the theme of this river, would be a place of cleansing. And yes, it is. It's the baptismal waters of dying to your flesh, of having your robes washed with your resurrection with Christ, and being clean as you come through the river into eternal life. You die to your old flesh and you rise to eternal life. And that is not just symbolic, but that is a spiritual event that happens to your person as you go through the waters of baptism, as you go through the river and into the kingdom of God. You are ushered into the kingdom of God through baptism. So the river is a very intentionally purposed, you're leaving the wilderness of sin, you're leaving Egypt, you're leaving the old things behind, and you're going into new life with Christ as your risen Lord, and he lives in you and you've risen with him. And so, the idea that they want us to believe the Jordan is kind of that river is offensive, I would say, for one. But one other thing that there is a talk going on about is that the headway of the river comes out of a spring. And I don't see this mentioned anywhere in Scripture. I know that many people have told me through different mediums that, media, that the headway of the river was the site of what they called the gates of hell at the bottom of Mount Hermon. And they tell us that there was sacrifice, like child sacrifice going on there, and that they worshipped these idols such as Pan, false gods. And that makes me wonder how much of that is actually true. If their depiction of Israel is incorrect to start with, but if this river is being kind of used to minimize the beauty of what God had done for the Israelites, and not just that, but Jesus was baptized in the Jordan. And I can't get my head around how would Jesus be baptized in the Jordan if there were sacrifices going on at the headway of the Jordan, at the gates of hell. That's a hard one for me to get my head around. So that is a big question mark for me, because I know that there are certain teachers online who I do respect around the whole unseen realm messaging, who would say that, and who would also give us this messaging that Mount Hermon and all of these locations in the Middle East are legitimate, for one thing, but that they play into the story of Jesus, you know. And I guess I just find it difficult to align the fact that Jesus was baptized in the Jordan. John was baptizing in the Jordan. How can that river have been flowing from a sacrificial point to pagan gods? That's a big question for me. And I don't have an answer to it. I just know that that puts more question marks around the Middle East as being the land flowing with milk and honey, and this promised land that God had given to them. And when we look at places like, Bethel, for example, the mountain, these mountains that are supposedly being depicted throughout Scripture, the descriptions of these places don't match what we have been seeing in the maps and in the imagery, the iconography that modern so-called historians and theologians have told us. This is a view of current-day River Jordan. I'll just go through a couple of these. Again, I could easily just swim across that, no problem. And this cow's not having too much of a problem crossing that river. But this is the Jordan. So as you can see, I think it's valid that we question what we're being told about these narratives. Along with everything else, there's so much misinformation being fed to us over the years, and being given that as people who had no reason to distrust at any point prior to, the last maybe 50 to 100 years. We were just taught through school and through church what these things were. And so I want to continue to highlight that they are likely feeding us some untruths. So going back to a map now, I want to travel north. And we know that Abram, in the previous part of this video, was instructed to go from the south, and I would say he was heading north as a matter of just logic. So, and we talked about the coastlines that were named or described for the inheritance of the various tribes. And so I just want to start looking at this map here. I noticed some very curious things. One of them, if we look back at this, 2nd Esdras 1345. And this is northern Siberia area. in northeast Russia, and this here is Alaska, and this is the Strait of Anyan, which is now the Bering Strait. And so that is the true north right up here. And just notice that Arzareth is named in this area directly across from Alaska. And if you go over a little bit more, what else do we have? And the coast reacheth to Tabor. Well, we go up here and we actually see Tabor right here. And if we go up a little bit more, we can see that along this coastline, there's a place called Naftalit. And here it says Neptali. And up here we have Danoram, Danatorium, host, Horda. So we have Dan, Naphtali, Tabor, Arzareth in this north region. This is northeast Russia, right across from Alaska. So I found another, and they would be also above the Arctic Circle, which I think is significant. So I found another map here, and this is of the same region. So a few things to note. Obviously Tartar, this is Tartaria. And we can see the word Magog here. And we can see the name Gog here. And there's some other writing over here. So what I did was I took those over to Google Translate. And this area up here, I translated, and it says, they are partly, oh no, sorry, that's not the right one. That's from down here actually. So it says here, they are partly worshipped by Christians and partly by Mohammedans, which were the Muslims. So this area here had Christians and Muslims. And I translated some of the other text from this map here. And it says the tribe of, okay, is called Naphtali. And after the Danes, the tribe that was called in the punishment of Denmarki because of the name fertile place, da, da, da. So you can see Denmark is named there. So the Danes sort of were of the shipping people and seafaring. And they looks like they may have migrated across the Northern Sea over to Denmark, what we now know as Denmark. Going back to this map, which is what I was trying to find. So this text here, I translated. Where is it? Here. And it says, whose inhabitants are called, I have earned it. So there was a plain area which was named after the people who are called, I have earned it. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. And then the text that was related to the Gog area. So here, and I think we can kind of figure out what that was talking about. which is called by others Gog, and which is called Magog to you. Now, this is an interesting one that I lifted off that map as well. It says, weather in which the Christians reigned at the time of something Paul, Master Paul, I don't know, 1290. And I'll just show you where that came from. That is from this area here. So again, this is right on the edge, northern edge of northeast Russia. North of China. So it talks about Paul, and I don't know, is that the Paul that we know from the Bible? I mean, 1290 is an interesting date to put on there. Here's a actual Christian map of the North region, and we can see that all of these areas are marked as Christian. So we can see Christian, all of these areas. And some of these say some Christians. And in this area here, looks like China. And even if we go over further, we can see Japan, there was some Christians. So all the way up this coast here, and here it says many Christians, and that kind of aligns with that other map that we saw where Paul was mentioned. So I wonder if there's a link there that we could make. So Tenduk, that area where it mentions Paul, I can go in a little bit closer on that one. Paul. So here we have many Christians, Tenduk in the northeast. And again, here we have a similar map, just showing all of these regions again. But again, just focusing on this northeastern region. I also want to mention that this is naming Arabs. That supports the fact that I think our idea of Arabia, where Arabia was or is, and some of those things have also been conflated with the narrative. And we see Magog here. We have Desert of Bel, Jian, and we know, well, I know, I've looked it up, that Bel actually often references Baal. So that plays a part in this map as well. And this map is from 1669, if anyone's looking for it. And it's just fascinating to look at all this. But you will see something I always find fascinating as well, is to just see how many, I guess, major cities it looks like were in these areas. So talking about Magog and Gog in the Bible, these are named quite a lot. Magog is a fairly important theme in end times speak throughout the Bible. And specifically, I think Revelation 20 mentions Gog and Magog will gather for battle. But it also mentions in Ezekiel 38:2. So, of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And again in Revelation, we have, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. Now, Gog was if we look at the word at the context of Gog. Just see if I have it on another screen here. Gog is actually the prince of the land of Magog. Also of the Rossi, is that Russia? Moshe and Tibereni, who is to come with great forces from the extreme north. So right there we have all of this location being identified. And Magog is the region, not the prince. So Gog and Magog are the prince and its region. So just something to bear in mind. And Magog were the sons of, I think it was the son of Japheth, the third son of Noah. And when we look at, so regionally, these people hold significance throughout the Bible. And when we talk about Japheth, the descendants are stated to have especially occupied the western and northern regions of the earth. So again, north is a big theme with all of these people and places and everything that's going on. One other thing I want to shout out to around the whole Tartaria concept, and many of us have mentioned this, is just that when we look at through the Bible, often the word Tartarus, is synonymous with hell. And I don't know if any of you saw this a while back, but there was some drilling going on in that region of Siberia. And for some reason, they dug down and down and down, and they heard screaming or something like that. And they put a microphone down and they got a couple of seconds of kind of this screaming sound. So whether that is related to this or not, if it is, it's been really hidden because I have actually looked for links. But clicking on the word hell in the KJV brings us to G5020 in the Strong's Concordance. And that tells us the word Tartaros, the deep abyss of hell. And yeah, so I think we just have to be mindful that all of the ancient world actually used synonymously the word hell with Tartarus. And it was actually a place where they would hold captive. So yeah, that's just, something we have to always read things in context. And the verse that it comes from is, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, Tartarus, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment." So I want to talk a little bit about giants. And this is kind of a leap into another part of this video because we have to talk about when the Israelites were crossing the river Jordan. Joshua and Caleb were instructed to go and destroy the inhabitants of the land. And this is a depiction of what those giants may have looked like throughout the land that they were to take. It's really important to note that as we consider the possibilities of the north being the land that was actually being talked about in the Bible, now that we've looked at the maps, we've looked at the names, we've drawn correlation between territories of land that were given to the descendants of Israel, we want to make sure that we also think about the other aspects to that. So if the Jordan was on one side, it was actually giants, and on the other side, Joshua and the people of God were leaving Egypt and they were leaving the desert, where else do we hear about giants in terms of geography, history, and obviously we have to dig for these things, but there is, and just reading Numbers 13:33 here, so, and there we saw giants, the son of Anak. So the Anakim were one of the races of giants that were on the land, in this land of milk and honey. So the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were on our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And this has been worked on by many people, but from these references here, Amos 2:9, and the height of Goliath, which has been named, we can work out that some of the biggest giants may have been as tall as this in comparison to humans. So when I was looking at other maps, I noticed that in this area of the Caspian Sea, between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, so comparatively sort of this region here, just close that. Anyway, in that region there, we have this, I don't even want to call it a legend. I think it was true that there was what they called the Alexander's Wall, or the Alexander Gates, and they had built a wall across to keep out the northern attackers. And here we have reference to Gog and Magog behind Alexander the Great's wall in China. And what I was just showing there was this translation off the map. It said, "Nothing of Alexander's columns exists today, nor is there any memory of the town among the Sarmatians." But there is this legend that Alexander the Great built a wall. And some people even speculate that the wall was actually the Great Wall of China. But that there was ferocious, what they called savages or barbarians north of the wall. And so, we can see some of that described. So the book of Ezekiel talks Gog, as if this Mongol leader. In some of the versions, it used the words horde, which if you look on the maps, they actually use the word horde. And historically, the Mongol invasions were done in hordes, and these are specific words that were used for the groups of attackers that were coming from the north. And so just to make a point that there has been kind of this known legend, myth, I think probably true, that the north was filled with giants and that kind of thing. So if we're thinking about this in a biblical context, the Israelites were crossing the Jordan and they were told by God to get rid of all these giants in the land. Well, if that's in the north, then the Jordan can't be a piddly little river in the Dust Bowl of the Middle East. So this is like reprogramming. This is removing the old software and starting to consider possibilities that the land of the Middle East, obviously it could be anywhere, but where I'm looking right now at the north, I'm seeing a lot of evidence that not only did Abram go north toward the land that God had promised him, but he was also, fast forward to Joshua's time and Moses, they saw the Jordan as this kind of barrier between where they were coming from, where they're going to. So, and that there would be this massive challenge on their hands to get rid of all these giants. And again, the north actually answers a lot of this. And here's just an artist's depiction of the wall, the Great Wall of Alexander. And I have a little video clip here that I just want to play. It's from the Game of Thrones. I didn't really watch it. I saw bits of it here and there, but I don't think it's a great show to watch, so I'm not recommending it. But they do talk about the wall, the ice wall, the north, and even giants beyond that.
Oil! Oil around!
That was just to kind of depict what I think the situation would have been at some point between this giant, this area that was filled with giants, and then the regular people. And so going back to Alexander the Great, it says here nothing is left of these columns, and there is no memory. So on this map here, we have a little bit of a story, like a puzzle piece to say, did Alexander actually do this, for one thing? Or was his wall gates, were they actually the Great Wall of China? And again, that can be disputed around how many people were involved in that, who actually built it, when it was built. So there's a lot of disagreement between some of that. But there is a story that came to my attention a few years ago, and it's about a northern mountain pass called the Dyatlov Pass. And there was an incident there in 1959 that left 9 people dead. It's very mysterious, but basically 23-year-old hiker named Igor led a journey to reach the peak of this mountain in the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. The young man brought a team of highly experienced hikers, many from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, along with him for the adventure. Before he left, he told his sports club that he and his team would send them a telegram as soon as they returned, but the telegram was never sent, and none of the hikers of so-called incident were ever seen alive again. When their bodies were found in the coming weeks, their strange and gruesome injuries left investigators baffled and repulsed. Some were missing eyes, another was missing her tongue, and many were struck by a force comparable to that of a speeding car, but no one could make sense of it. The Soviet government closed the pass case quickly and offered only thin explanations, saying that they died due to hypothermia because they were inexperienced or those kinds of things. So this mystery has been sort of shrouded in cover-up and things like that. My question is, were they just wanting to close the pass? And so this tragedy had to occur so that they could actually close this place and reduce access to a certain area. That often happens, and we see that every now and again. So that's just something about the northern region, even in more recent context, giving us a bit of mystery, a bit of danger. And going back to movies like The Village from 2004, where people are living in a village and they are surrounded by these monsters, which actually were created by the people in control of the village to keep them contained within the fence that they should stay in. And so I wonder if some of these so-called tragedies are manufactured. Maybe not, maybe it actually happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of these tragedies are manufactured to keep us hemmed in and fenced in, so we don't go to these areas that may take us to places that are actually out of bounds according to the people that need to keep us where we are. And again, I want to just draw attention to the Great Wall of China. this is right below the area of Magog, the land of Magog, and in that northeastern region of Soviet Russia, or Russia, I guess. And these walls are very high, and just to say that it was very long, basically has been enlarged over the years to 6,400 kilometers. And it's in very stable condition, and just to note that. So, the region that it would have covered would have been very, very broad. And the assumption is that the invaders were coming from the north. I have heard that access to the wall was from the north, so it wouldn't make sense that the invaders were coming from the north but going along the lines of what we know so far, I think that the areas of the north have been named, and I'm building an understanding that the north is the region that Joshua, the Israelites, were told to clear out. Something else I picked up on the map, on some of these maps, this text here, I thought this was a very interesting image. A woman holding a child, and this is in the north, sort of the European sort of area. And it says, "Here is the golden idol that the inhabitants of this part worshipped." Well, doesn't it just look like the Isis, Horus idols that we see now in the so-called Roman Catholic churches? And a revival truly of the old idolatry that was present across the world. Okay, so the northeast Russian area is actually called Chukotka, and you can see how close it is there to Alaska. We're going to go into that again in a future, in another part of this series, because I want to really address that connection between Eastern Russia and Alaska and the North, and why that narrow little strip of water there is, was necessary for the United States to be involved in. They actually went and purchased Alaska for the purpose of, I think, having control and monitoring that area specifically. So when I found this map, it's kind of it's all in Russian, which I like, because it's okay, we can translate that now. But this is that same region, and what I noticed is that Wrangel Island, which on the Mercator map is actually the magnetic north, is lined out with red lines. So that's number 1 and a number 1 on it. And then this northeast region, where I identified that was very Christian, and Paul had actually been named on that map in this region here, as well as some of the tribes of Israel. So I decided to just translate some of the legend from this map. So I went down here and I looked at, 1 and 2 on this map. First of all, actually, just to comment that this place here, I don't know how you actually pronounce it in Russian, but that place there translated to the word freedom. So that there translated to the word freedom, which I found really, really curious as to why they would name that spot that. But translating the legend on the map, we have number 1, so Wrangel Island, And what these are, they are reserves, sanctuaries, natural parks. And when we talk about the parks that have been designated all over the world, including places like Arizona, the Grand Canyon, that area, they make places very much under their control by saying, well, this is a park we want to preserve. We want to reserve this place. We want to keep it natural. And that's all, that's kind of the marketing line for these places. They're being called protected areas. So Wrangel Island is one of them. And then this number 2, natural ethnic Beringia. So looking at the map, this area here is actually called Beringia, and we see a latitude line of 180 actually go right through kind of the side, right beside that. And this area here is called Freedom. And so Beringia, I was very curious about what that meant. I've never heard of that before. So I went and found that on here, Wikipedia. And so Beringia is defined today as the land and maritime area bounded on the west by the Lena River, which is in Russia, and on the east by the Mackenzie River in Canada. So when I opened this image area, and I think you can go through. So the Beringia, which actually is maybe where Bering Sea comes from, Beringia, is an area that is defined to include part of Siberia and and Alaska. And then another image shows us that there was this migration going on back and forth. So peopling of Beringia, so that's number 1. Number 2 here says maturation of the New World founders during the LGM in the Beringia Glacial Refugium, so in this area. So this is calling the maturation of the New World founders. And then back migration of these people, I guess, C1A, wherever that is. And then number 4 was the later arrival of the D2 and the spread of D2A. And then the back migration of A2A. And then swift peopling of the Americas. So all the way down. It shows it going all the way down to South America. Okay? Peopling. So yeah, this area here became an area that is, if we go back to the wiki, so 72 degrees north latitude in the Chukchi Sea and on the south by the tip of Kamchatka. It includes the Chukchi Sea and the Bering Sea. So it's a very large area, and it is shared by Russia and America across Alaska. And it also includes the Yukon. At various times it formed a land bridge, referring to as the Bering Land Bridge that was up. And we're going to go into this more in an upcoming part of this series about the river. So yeah, just really note that when they talk about people just meandering across the Bering Strait when the ice was there, I think this is a little bit more intentional. I think this tells me that New World founders were peopling the area of this world over here, the Americas. That sounds like a verb. This is what they're doing. So I'm going to tell you that the part of the history of this northern region is connected to London. And every year, the London Mayor Show includes two giants, effigies, called Gog and Magog. And this has been going on for a long time. This is not a new thing in London, but they are giants. And one thing that I read here is that Gog and Magog, or sometimes Gog Magog and Corinius, are descended from mythical pagan giants, and their origins lie in medieval legends of the early British kings. So this north region, actually, if we look back at the history of the Bible, we look at who the enemies of God are, we look at the Ezekiel and the Revelation messages, this is something that's very key to the whole big picture in our generation. Okay, so one thing that I have found out is that the people under the direction of Magog were called, under Gog were called Magog. So you had Gog, who is the prince of Rosh, and then you have Magog, who are the people that are being governed by Gog. Okay, so Lord Rothschild held the title of Lord Mayor, and it has been held by 4 Rothschilds since. And it is understood that Lord Rothschild is Gog. That title, Lord Rothschild, being handed on and on and on, is actually Gog. And this title also funded the Bolshevik Revolution, which we'll talk about in future parts. And I just want to make a point that this is also the banking family of the world. So we talk about the London Lord Mayor, Gog and Magog. This is a puzzle that's all being put together as related to the adversary of God in Ezekiel prophecy and in the Revelation prophecy. I think I have to make the point here that when we look at Revelation 20 and we see that it tells us that Gog and Magog will come against the camp of the saints, okay? And, these are all the wars that are being funded. If we can look at it that way, the money center of the world is actually London. And Lord Rothschild, the banking family that kind of leads this whole endeavor, who is also identified as Gog, is leading the world into war against the camp of the saints. This is just something that you have to read as like a side-by-side story. And so when we talk about Gog and Magog visibly being alive and well and running the show in this world, I hear people talking about full preterism as if this everything has come to completion. Well, the evidence says it hasn't. The evidence tells me that in London we still have Gog. Gog is in London. And the enemies of God and the enemies of the saints are alive, and they are working very hard to set up their positions around the camp of the saints. And there's a lot of evidence to show that all of the north is surrounded by military bases, and they create this scenario where you think, okay, Russia and the US are bitter enemies. Well, look, they own this land that spans northeast Russia and Alaska. So how can they be bitter enemies? There's hardly any protection on either side of those that channel, the Bering Strait or the Strait of Anyan. there's hardly any protection in between. It's a very unmonitored, and yet everyone's looking north. So you know, the way that they sell these stories is that, okay, we have to point right across the north to protect ourselves. You know, we have to point all of our guns right towards the north because our adversary is right on the other side of the north. And that's how they position things, which is actually a very false way to look at it because they're right beside each other. So something I want to mention in this video is about the north and the east and the south and the west. So I think it's quite evident that the north is in the center for those of us who believe in the biblical cosmology, and that south is actually the circle that goes around. This map here is from 1920, I think, and it's called the New Correct Map of the Flat Surface Stationary Earth. This guy he makes me laugh because he's very, very deliberate. That writing there is in some kind of Arabic. And there's a back to the map as well. But first I want to just say that what he's done here is he has labeled east, west, south, north, and he's put the barrier in between here. So we see Russia is there and Alaska is there. And so this would be the prime meridian that we talked about in a previous video called Sides of the North. Straight is the gate. And we are going to get back to that in future episodes. But for now, I wanted to look at, so this is the back of this map. There's been some text written there. And so if we zoom in here, he says, I have published this map to reveal the true posture of the earth. First, to help the people in recognition of the fact that the earth is flat and does not move. Second, so that the young people in schools and in higher positions may have the benefit of the truth. There are many proofs that the subject is true, as you will be sure to find in my book, The Enlightenment of the World. The theory of the round and floating earth is false, and you should not believe in it. As long as you yourself can see and feel that the earth is a plain object, and is standing still, you will see that the sun, moon, and stars are daily in motion. They arrive every day from the east to the west. The sun's light progresses from the south, advancing to the north, and returns in 1 year. And then he goes into more detail about that, which I think is great. But he talks about the earth being divided into 5 zones. The north is the center, which is dark for 6 months and is lighted for 6 months. Second is the north, and then he goes through the different zones, the tropics, and I just find his map very, very helpful. I want to talk about, I want to talk about Pilgrim's Progress, and we'll come back to the locations of East and West. A lot of this content is really hard to piece together because it is very broad. So there's lots of topics. We've been talking about giants and rivers and locations and talking about how the Bible describes things differently to what we understand. But I think the Pilgrim's Progress goes back far enough to a point of time where the author, John Bunyan, understood more about the cosmology, and he was a preacher, a minister, a very, very Christian man. Someone in my comments said, ooh, I think he's a Freemason, and I did actually look into that, but reading, and there's no evidence of that, by the way, and reading his work, it is so scripturally grounded. He references everything to scripture. There is really no room in my mind for this assumption that he would be a Freemason. I think some people are named as Freemasons to kind of get people to stop looking at them, to forget about them. And I don't think that's fair because John Bunyan is a very, very Christian man. I have enjoyed his work so much. And as I said previously, my dad did a lot of work in researching around Freemasons, as have I now as I've grown older. And I just don't see the hallmarks there at all. Something that is relevant to this conversation is that the river. And so as Christian travels north towards the celestial city, he comes to a river after all of his journeying through the various challenges and trials that he met on the way. And something that he's saying here is they came to the site of the gate. Now I further saw that betwixt them and the gate was a river, but there was no bridge to go over. And the river was very deep. At the sight, therefore, of this river, the pilgrims were much stunned. But the men that went with them said, "You must go through, or you cannot come to the gate." For they said, "You shall find it deeper or shallower as you believe in the King of the place." This is all about Jesus. If we believe in Jesus and we have given ourselves to the point of going through the river to get to him, then we will find Jesus. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be opened unto you. It says here, Christian said, so they're cheering him on, and he says, "My friend, the sorrows of death had compassed me about. I shall not see the land that flows with milk and honey." So he's now in the river. He's going through the deep waters. And, some people would say this is the river of death. This is when we die, we go through this river. And it says, "Now you must note, so now upon the bank of the river on the other side, they saw that two shining men who waited for them. Wherefore, being come out of the river, they saluted them, saying, We are ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those that shall be heirs of salvation. Thus they went along toward the gate." So this is just fast forwarding to when Christian came out of the river and they had made it through. He found his feet and he stood up to go on the other side. So they see the city before them. It stood upon a mighty hill. But the pilgrims went up that hill with ease because they had these two men to lead them up by the arms. Also, they had left their mortal garments behind them in the river. And that to me indicates that the way that John Bunyan is talking about this is that the river is actually death. And then it says, "They therefore went up here with much agility and speed, though the foundation upon which the city was framed was higher than the clouds. They therefore went up through the regions of the air. And there, said they, is the Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, the innumerable company of angels and the spirits of just men made perfect. You are going now, said they, to the paradise of God, wherein you shall see the tree of life, and eat of the never-fading fruits thereof. And when you come there, you shall have white robes given you, and your walk and talk shall every day be with the King, even all the days of eternity. And you must there receive the comforts of all your toil, and have joy for all your..." I don't know what the end of that sentence was, but so this is pilgrim. These are the pilgrims. I think it's hopeful and Christian being ushered up into the celestial city. So they're being lifted up. "You must reap what you have sown, even the fruit of all your prayers and tears and suffering for the King by the way. In that place you must wear crowns of gold and enjoy the perpetual sight and visions of the Holy One, for there you shall see him as he is. There also you shall serve him, and continually with praise, with shouting and thanksgiving, whom you desire to serve in the world, though with much difficulty because of the infirmity of your flesh." And, that really is it does provide allegory to the story as a Christian that we travel through this world of toil and pain, and we stand on this narrow path, we walk on this narrow path of living justly and righteously before the Lord, because the joy at the end of the journey will be given to us by our King. That is salvation, that is eternal life, that is a life filled with pleasures and joy forevermore. And I believe it is a physical place, but I also believe that our flesh is not something, it says flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. That's what the Bible says. And so while we seek the kingdom, while we look for the answers, we do have to realize that this life is part of our eternal story. You know, there obviously we want to just walk out of here. I do, of course I do. And you know, the end of Revelation does tell us, come, you know, come to drink from the water of life. Come, you know, those who have been washed, those who have done the commands, and those whose robes have been washed, come. So on one hand, the Lord is beckoning us to come, but he's also, you know, we're also going to be rewarded by the lives that we lived. So there is, again, there's this physical aspect, and there is also the spiritual aspect to our journey. And one other thing I wanted to show you is another book that John Bunyan wrote. So it's called Solomon's Temple Spiritualized, and the other title being Gospel Light. And it talks about the temple and the building of the temple, the structure of the temple at Jerusalem. I think it's page 22. And something I wanted to start just mentioning right now, because I'll get to it in another video, but the door of the temple was facing towards the east. And the reason for the east is that it would keep the people of God from committing idolatry, from worshiping the hosts of heaven and the sun, whose rising is from the east. So if you understand that the temple, when you walk in and you bow down to God in the temple, your back would be to the east. And that is the intention. So one thing I want to start talking about again is just the directions of the movements of the sun and the moon and the locations of the earth in relation to that. But when they talk about the heathen in the Bible, the heathen would face the sun. They were sun worshippers. But when you went into the temple to worship God, the east was behind you and you would be facing west. And that's why locations of things are very important. Where the sun rises and the sun sets, that is key to understanding the building of the temple, the location of God, how God wants us to worship him. And so, you know, sometimes I think about the Stonehenge and how people will gather facing the east to watch the sun come through the Stonehenge. But actually, that was a heathen practice, and that aligns perfectly with the paganism that the Bible, Christ actually destroyed and the church destroyed over the millennial reign, were these practices and these heathen ways, because God is not worshipped in that way. And so I just wanted to draw attention to that as well. But yeah, just to round out this conversation, I think knowing that our hope of glory is coming. It's not something that's going to be held from us. You know, we're not going to be always in this world of sin. We're not always going to be captive, if you will, in Egypt or Babylon, as I think of it. We are going to leave the land, and we are going to go across the river into God's kingdom, and we will inherit eternal life. We will inherit new bodies. We will be restored. And I do think it's important that we understand our cosmology. I think it's important that we understand the lay of the land, literally, as it relates to the people that are in charge, where we talk about Gog and Magog. I think it's important to understand that the land of the Bible may not be where they've told us it is. It may actually be in the northern region, which is what I think, which is where the giants are or were. And we can see evidence of that through the Great Walls of China, the Gates of Alexander, and a lot of the mythology that goes along with that. But when we realize that the people that are funding all the wars in the world actually identify themselves as Gog and Magog through the financial industry, the banking industry. And so I think these are all really important concepts to realize. I think going through the Bible and reading it and comparing it with what they're telling us to be true, for example, the location in the Middle East that they want us to believe was the Promised Land, and all of the artifacts in those areas that, those ancient sites that many people have exposed as being manufactured, even unto the point of the pyramids. And I don't think the pyramids are all that great, to be honest with you. I don't think they're that amazing. When you look at some of the ancient architecture that we can see that's being torn down all around us or modified, those are much more impressive to me than the pyramids. I don't know. Maybe I just don't get it. But something about these locations in the Dust Bowls of the Middle East, they want us to believe that they're important and they're significant. And it's a little bit like the Kansas City Shuffle. You look right, they go left, And so, are we being distracted by the so-called ancient sites of the Mediterranean region and the those kind of like Northern Africa and places like that, when really we should be looking north. We should be looking to the north for more information. And there's a lot there that I'm going to cover. But I think initially this is hopefully going to be helpful to get us on the path to understanding, was the Jordan really the Jordan River that they tell us it was? Where might that be? We're going to look more at the northern regions of the earth and compare to even the skies and the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon and all of those things. So I hope you'll stay with me with this one, and I thank you for joining me today. I've really appreciated it, and I love doing this, and I'll continue to pray about how many more I should make here. But thank you so much for your lovely emails and all your kind words, and I look forward to talking to you in the comments. Thank you. Bye-bye.